Okay, everybody. Thank you for your patience today. And welcome to AAC in the Cloud, sponsored by Forbes AAC and Cough Drop AAC, as well as Open AAC. So we are excited to have Melissa today presenting on early childhood access to universal communication supports. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and hand it over to her to introduce her slides and go through. If you have questions as we go, make sure that you're writing those in track 2 in Slack, and I'll get those over to Melissa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm super excited to be here to talk about the intersection of universal design for learning and AAC in the preschool classroom, strategies and solutions for addressing early childhood access to universal communication supports. I know that is a mouthful, but we will unpack that all in the next hour. So thank you for being here, and I appreciate any questions you may have along the way. My name is Melissa Friscia, and I am a licensed and certified speech language pathologist. The TSSLD you see there is a teaching certification because I'm currently practicing in the state of New York, and I am an assistive technology professional certified. All right, so moving forward, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. As I mentioned, if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer along the way. If we don't get to everything today, I completely understand we are under some time constraints, so I'm available afterwards or via email for any follow-ups you might have. And I just invite you to have an open mind for anything that's new or maybe a little surprising to your practice, and have some fun learning today about all the different ways we're going to be able to support and advocate for our preschool students. Just a quick disclosure, I have nothing to disclose financially. Non-financially, some relevant relationships are that I do work for a not-for-profit organization in Long Island, New York, where I support students provides educational supports and services to preschool students. I'm also a member of ASHA's Special Interest Group 12, Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and SIG, or Special Interest Group 16, School-Based Issues. And as I mentioned previously, I hold the RESNA Assistive Technology Professional Certification, and I am a member of RESNA. So just a quick snippet of my background. I am, as I mentioned, a licensed and certified speech language pathologist. I received my bachelor's and master's degrees at the College of St. Rose in Albany, New York. I have been a practicing speech language pathologist, or SLP, for the past 14 or so years, coming on 15 soon. And I've worked with students from ages 3 to 21 in the states of New York and Hawaii in the United States. And you can just see a couple of the volunteer and appointed roles that I have taken throughout my career. I've done a lot of advocacy work and support across different organizations. And I've also presented on AAC, why I'm here today, as well as emergent literacy, supporting students in rural and remote areas, and narrative language development. And I have presented at the department level, school level. I've presented for districts, state, and at the national level as well. And all that being said, just a quick, snippet on who I am. Why preschool, right? I've always been drawn to supporting the preschool population, particularly because play is a very tall order that at best is the most wonderful and enjoyable experience, right? We're connecting, we're having fun. But, just starting off today, we, and I'm saying we inclusive of everyone that is here today, making the assumption that you are some type of educator or support role for children who work in early childhood, we all have the potential to change the trajectory of our students' lives, which is pretty tall order, just as tall as an order as play. So if you're here with me today, we're likely also in this unique position of supporting a young student and their family with the tools they need for the rest of their life. And not only can you model how to advocate for student needs, but you have the opportunity to shift mindsets of those you work with and any preconceived notions about disability that you might encounter along the way. And another point, just thinking about why we want to, be here today, thinking about this topic, is that if we set the baseline now for what ideal inclusive practices look like, the students you work with and their families will be able to hold all of the future schools accountable for upholding an accessible educational experience, right? We're in early childhood, which, depending on where you are located, whether that's state, country, region, area. You might be thinking preschool. It might be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. I primarily work with 3 to 5-year-olds, but wherever that, whatever that means for you, we're just setting our families up to really know what, best case scenario for inclusive practices looks like. And so, as you can see, my dogs, Dolce and Vita there, are joining us today. They love to be a part of things, and I'm currently not at my home, so they're here with us in spirit. Just what we're going to be hopefully gaining at the end of this hour is we're going to talk about universal design for learning and the framework that can be applied to early childhood classrooms. We're going to specifically talk about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, in relation to communication, supports, and strategies. We're going to identify some AAC tools, strategies, and systems that we can utilize within our early childhood settings. And because, the whole purpose of this conference, this time around is really talking about breaking barriers, we are going to list barriers that do exist, even if you have the education and the knowledge. And then we're going to also talk about some potential solutions towards implementing the universal AAC and supports and services that we'll talk about today. So hopefully you leave here being able to think about a barrier that you might be facing and a way that you can address that barrier. All right, so we are going to dive right into universal design for learning. And in order to do that, we have to start with a nice little foundation here of what universal design means. So universal design, or UD, is design that's usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without needing to adapt or specialize the design. There's a little star there, just to note that, some people will have significant functional needs that require specialized design, right? That's why we have individualized educational plans, and we, modify and provide accommodations for our students. However, if universal design is the foundation, as we add in specialized features, it's a lot easier and more cost-effective than if the design is fully specialized from the start. And you might have heard universal design be known as design for all, inclusive design, or barrier-free design. All of these definitions or terms indicate universal design. And just some more information here, right, related to our foundation of universal design. So it was initially created to support individuals with disabilities from an architectural standpoint. And as I, just mentioned previously, if structures are accessible, the whole concept was that they would be able to be accessed by more of the population at baseline, right? Less modifications, costs necessary to accommodate the diverse access needs of the population. And this was primarily for buildings and infrastructure to be designed to be accessible. And hopefully you can kind of in your head know where we're going with this, or kind of assume that we're going to be moving towards education. We'll get there in a second. So just some examples of universal design that you might see today. You might see an entrance and exit ramp. You might see an adjustable desk, lever handles on doors instead of turning the doorknobs, closed captioning, speech to text, magnification on your smartphone. And these are all examples of features or designs or architectural aspects of our environment that were created for individuals who might have diverse needs or functional, necessary needs, but it really is benefiting and supporting society as a whole. And for the sake of time today, I'm not going to read through all of these principles, but just know they exist. Principle of universal design. There are 7 of them that were developed just to really think about what the ideal product or item or architectural piece would look like if it was indeed, universally designed. And just a quick note as well, you can see at the bottom here, I do have a link to where I found this information. Throughout the entire presentation today, you'll likely find, or you will find links on the slide so that you can readily access the information. So then that brings us to our universal design for learning. So universal design for learning framework, as developed and outlined by the CAST organization, applies universal design principles to educational settings, right? So we talked about universal design as a whole for the entire general population, and now we're thinking about universal design in the classroom. So it not only includes construction and adaptation of the physical building space, but this also includes modifications, accommodations to learning supports, and teaching methodologies. And I really like this quote here. And for the sake of our time today, we're not going to watch a lot of videos, but they'll be here with the links ready for you to click on if you have the slides from the link on when you logged in today. But I like this quote: when you design for everyone, everyone benefits from the design. So something to think about when we're thinking about communication in classrooms and all the tools that you're going to see today. And so we can relate those 7 principles that I showed you a few slides ago to universal design for learning. That the CAST organization said, we're going to have our own principles here to really hone in on what universal design looks like when we talk about learning and education. So we're going to provide multiple means of engagement, the why of learning, right? The motivation behind why students want to learn and what they like to learn. We're going to provide multiple means of representation, right? The what of learning, what are the tools and the curriculum that we're going to be teaching, and how are we going to represent what we're teaching. And then we're going to talk about providing multiple means of action and expression, the how of learning. And this last one is really what we're going to focus on today, right? We're going to talk about expression a lot. And I found this great little handout from the Florida Inclusion Network, and there's a link there, right? This is a screen capture from this PDF. So I thought it was great. It broke up those 3 principles that I talked about previously, universal design for learning principles, and it really shows us for early childhood, oops, went a little too far there. It really shows us for early childhood a nice little checklist of how we can ensure that we are incorporating those principles into a classroom setting. So we can, at the bottom here, really focus on employing various methods of response and optimizing access to tools and technology when we think about AAC. So we're not going to address all of these today, but these 2 highlighted here. And there's some other really great tools within this handout PDF if you'd like to go to this link. All right, so moving ahead again, we're kind of just building the foundation up here, because the more knowledge you know, the more knowledge you have about what universal design looks like and how we can relate it to schools, the better equipped you will be to help advocate for implementing these types of systems within the school or system or district that you work in. And you'll see the acronym here, LEA, that stands for Local Education Agency. So your district or LEA might be using something called multi-tiered systems of supports or response to intervention, so MTSS or RTI. Don't worry if you've never heard of these acronyms. Our world is full of acronyms in education. But if you have, and you are using some aspects of MTSS or RTI within your practice, I encourage you to think about AAC as we move forward with some examples to think about how we can provide a high level of flexibility and variety within our supports for students, for all students, to encompass the different ways in which our students access their education. All right, and so I'm moving over to AAC. We're really getting there, I promise. I just wanted to give that background. So we're going to talk about where AAC fits into universal design for learning. And so I'm coming to you all today with the assumption that we have a little bit of experience with AAC, because we could really spend a nice chunk of time talking about AAC and digging into the nitty-gritty of definitions. But just for the sake of us being here today, I'm assuming we have a little bit of an understanding. Augmentative alternative communication, any tools that enhance or replace speech or mouth words. And if you do need more information, I'm more than happy to connect with you following the presentation or guide you to some resources that can help you with a better understanding of that definition. But really what I want you to think about is, by providing access to all of the AAC supports in a preschool classroom that we are going to talk about, promise it's coming, educators can offer multiple ways for students to express what they know and what they think, right? Think about those principles we just talked about, and multiple ways for students to receive instruction, right? So those multiple ways, those are the principles for educational, for universal design for learning in educational setting. So now that we have a little bit of a understanding of how we're connecting AAC and Universal Design for Learning, the way I framed it is we want to think of our students first, right? Always first, foremost, students first. So we are going to talk about considerations and, maybe a better word would be benefits, but it also, considerations in general for our students. And then on the next slide, we are going to talk briefly about some considerations or benefits for our staff, right? Our students are first, like I just mentioned, but we do want to make sure that we are acknowledging all of the stakeholders when it comes to AAC, right? It's not just all of these considerations for students, but it is also thinking about how we can support our communication partners, which typically are our staff members when we are thinking about school-based AAC supports. So for students, if we look at AAC as a universal design support, our students are going to have more ways to communicate that can lead to less frustration and more connection. And also for students, they will not need to access auditory comprehension skills required to understand spoken language. And what that really means is that there's a lot of task demands when it comes to taking in information that is provided via spoken language. So they can focus on responding rather than encoding and processing all of the language that they are hearing if we look at using AAC supports in the classroom. Also, by sharing the same tools with their peers, students have a consistent mode of communication to interact with one another. And that's a pretty exciting thing. And also, if AAC is the norm, this can lead to some decreased stigmatization around the use of assistive technology tools for communication. And, I wish that there never was a stigmatization. I know that it's not stigmatizing to have AC in the classroom, and I know for many of us here, it's not. However, we are working within an environment where educators and staff come from different walks of life of understanding, experiencing AAC. So, if we continue to make AAC just the norm that everyone has access, regardless of if you have an individualized AAC tool or device, we really can just make it just the daily expectation and, what the classroom looks like as opposed to something that is individualized only for a specific student or two. And then if you have students who are waiting for an AAC device, they're going to have access to communication supports in the interim. So it's really great to have options for students as they're waiting to get their AAC devices, whether they are receiving an evaluation or you're waiting on your district or your organization to actually provide the equipment. And then we have our education or considerations, like I mentioned, right? We want to really reach out and show how important and how beneficial it can be for our staff as well to have AAC as universal design for learning supports. So just like students will have more ways to communicate with one another and with their, educators or teachers and staff, educators will have more ways to communicate with their students as well. And also, we talked about MTSS briefly. Your teams will have tried lots of different tools prior to identifying the need for more individualized supports, right? We're not doing anything until there is an issue. We are supporting and continuously and finding what's working best for our learners and realizing that, wow, this tool is really necessary for this child to access their curriculum and to communicate effectively. And then, of course, we'll have some data when considering if they need specific devices or service added to their IEPs. Also, now by providing various modes of communication, educators can potentially reduce the level of prompting during speaking and listening tasks. And this comes from some clinical experience of, having staff repeat things verbally continuously, not necessarily providing sufficient wait time for students. So if we're looking at providing different ways for our educators to communicate, they will, be able to have a little less prompting on their end and really see some seamless learning taking place as students are using AAC as visual reference for understanding and using language. And then the last 2 points, thinking about our stakeholders, our educators, which you may or may not be some of you here today. I'm hoping that we have some teachers here today that are going to take and share this information with the staff that they work with. If we're using several tools, as opposed to every student having an individualized tool, which again, if that is necessary, we absolutely provide. But if we're just starting out and thinking about, how we can shift the classroom environment, it will take less time for familiarizing with tools and training. You'll have more confidence if you have just several tools ready to go within the classroom, as opposed to creating, if you have a class of 12 children, 12 different tools and trying to learn all the different programs, whether they're, on a tablet or they're printed. So some nice considerations there for our staff. All right, so that being said, we have a little bit of a foundation, as I keep saying. Foundation, so important, right? If you are an architect, you are starting from the bottom up, you are building, and we're just building up our understanding of why we would want to use the tools that we're about to talk about. So AAC, right? We have unaided and aided AAC. I mentioned we're not going to deep dive into the definition of AAC, but just for our referencing today, we are only going to focus on aided AAC. So we are specifically talking about tools in the classroom that we can use for communication. And the different types of tools, we have light or low tech. I like the word light. It tends to have less of a connotation of low being not as important. So I'll use them interchangeably, but we have light tech, mid tech, high tech. You can see there on the variations between the different types of AAC, right? We're either not requiring a battery, typically printed. We move to mid, we're having batteries, typically providing digitized or recorded speech, and our high tech, typically something that has to be plugged in, and not always, but often providing synthesized speech or speech that can be generated in the moment. And here is an example of what I just talked about, but just with some specific examples here. So on the left side of the screen, we have our light tech all the way through to our high tech on the right side of the screen. Again, some examples, by no means a closed set of what's available out there. And you can see the note on the bottom. Students can start and move between anywhere on this continuum. So whether that's day by day, interaction by interaction, depending on the needs and preferences of the student. All right, so I know you are ready to see all of the goodies that we can talk about, right? We're going to have a lot more examples in a slide or two, but just thinking about benefits of light and mid-tech AAC tools as universal classroom supports, right? So just going back, we have all of these that we can use as classroom supports, right? These are devices that can be used for one child only, or they can be used for everyone as universal design for learning supports. So if we think about using our light and mid-tech tools within the classroom, the great thing is that they are readily available online to print at little to no cost. And it typically doesn't require extensive funding once you get all of those office supplies right off the bat. Doesn't require specialized skills or extensive training to create the tools. You might need to support someone with, utilizing a printer and laminating and cutting. But other than that, we're good to go. Light tech tools are also really durable, but they are easy to replace if they're broken or lost. Our mid-tech tools, such as recordable buttons, can also function as low-cost, low prep supports in the classroom. So just thinking about that as in this category as well, yes, they do cost a little more. You're going to have to order them and they will be a little more expensive, but not as expensive as our high-tech options. Which leads me to thinking a little bit about we might want to consider high-tech AAC tools. And if those of you are here today working in a preschool classroom or an early childhood setting, you might experience some of the challenges with costs and having access to high-tech tools. So, that is one reason why we might think of low and mid-tech tools. But, just thinking about some benefits, if you do have access to high-tech tools such as a tablet with an app on it for communication. Students can, having all of this access daily can help teachers or educators identify students who may need the tools and individualized support. And then if a student is transitioning to their individual device, then they will have daily access to their future AAC system, and that will expedite their operational proficiency. So pretty exciting to have them know exactly how to use the tool before they get it in their hands daily as part of their accommodation. And then after you initially program a high-tech device, there's minimal additional prep time needed, right? So we might need to continually create, print, laminate, cut, record, or program, different types of light and mid-tech supports, but we might not see that as much for our high-tech tools. Something else that's been beneficial, if you do have a site that has high-tech supports, you can share device user profiles or page sets. And light tech supports can easily be created from your tools. You can email, you can message them, print them directly from your high-tech AAC device. So just some benefits there if you're kind of thinking about, where you want to go with starting high tech, starting low tech, starting both. Just some food for thought as you're connecting with your stakeholders, whether that be your administration, your fellow colleagues, if you are a therapist, if you're connecting with teachers, if you're here as a teacher, just, supporting the rest of your staff in advocating for the use of some of these tools. And on the next few slides, you're going to view a variety of AAC tools that have the potential to benefit students in your classroom or your school, wherever you may be currently supporting students. And I have used a lot of these tools, but have not yet explored all of the available options that exist. So there's some that I'll be sharing that I haven't used personally, but are on my list of things I would just love to get my hands on and, be able to support our students with. And I did use several screen grabs, some captures from the Instagram account of AAC for All. I'm not affiliated with the creator of the account or their opinions, and their opinions do not or views do not reflect my own personal views. Just wanted to, put that out there. However, I just really enjoy the ways that they modify and adapt AAC tools. So there's a lot of great accounts out there and websites and blogs that are just sharing all the really cool things that are happening in classrooms. And just an example, this is what my desk looks like on a good day. Just kidding, I mess things up a little bit before I organize them. But just to kind of think about what's out there, this is one of the primary tools I will often start with in classrooms are printable core vocabulary communication boards. You can use copy paper or cardstock. You can customize a board or find a pre-made board. And there's lots of pre-made boards offered by different AAC companies that typically mimic the app's page sets or often like the home screen. They will look exactly like that home screen. And icons and grids in these printed boards can be arranged in different ways. So in an effort of time, we're just going to have this up here. Just know that there's different ways that you can organize your symbols on AAC boards, right? You can go by communication functions, pragmatics. You can go by semantic or syntax, right? Looking at parts of speech or word order in a sentence, by categories. You can have icons that have multiple meanings, which is semantic compaction. You can organize your board by having access to a keyboard or pre-stored text in it. I'm just going to pause for a second here in case you'd like to take a screen grab or just a picture. This is by no means a finite list of all of the ready-to-go printable communication boards, but it's just a great starting place for you all to be able to compare, contrast some of the different core vocabulary boards out there. So again, you click on these links or you go to these sites and you have printable files ready to be created for classrooms. And within these printable communication boards that I just mentioned, these are some of the symbols that you might see there, right? And there's a lot, a lot of symbol sets out there. So, you may have heard of symbol sticks or MinSpeak or, PCS, different types of pictures out there. There's so many open symbols, right? There's a lot of different picture symbols out there. And you can see the link down there, All Amazing Kids LLC. I really appreciate all of the resources that are available on her website. So please feel free to check out social media. Again, not reflecting my views or opinions, just an account that I found really helpful in my practice. And so thinking about, how we're going to select a symbol set. So you're like, great, I'm doing it. I know that I need to get some pictures. I need to pick a board. I need to pick symbols. Some considerations as you're getting yourself started with that and working with your teams. I might think about certain symbol sets that are already being used in the classroom by you or others. Thinking about if your school or organization has a subscription or access to programs like Lesson Picks or Board Maker. So if you've got something going already, I would say run with it. You can make anything work as needed. Are there any students currently using an AAC device or system that has a particular symbol set, right? So if you have a student that is currently using LAMP or Polo to Go, or is using a GoTalk and they have boards in there already, think about how you can maybe, consider using that symbol set across your whole classroom. And then just always cultural considerations, right, of your individual students, cultural considerations of your classroom and your community as you're thinking about symbols. And just another note on symbols, right, that we are, of course, needing to understand, our students need to understand what the symbol looks like, but that our initial focus often for early learners is where the symbol is on a communication board. So we're really thinking about motor planning, helping our students become efficient communicators. And to all those who I meet who are very, very worried that the student might not know what the picture means, I relate it to thinking about the apps on your phone, right? And how you have automaticity of being able to find your text or your Instagram or whatever app that you use often, right? And even if they were to change the symbol, you would be able to find your app immediately because you just have the motor plan for where you keep it on your screen in your phone. So thinking about that, of course, we are going to simultaneously teach the skill of what the pictures mean and be able to visually discriminate and identify the pictures, but we really want to help our learners focus on where the symbols or the devices are in our early stages of supporting our AAC learners in the classroom. So now we have some very specific examples. We're going to go through some slides of ideas and options. Feel free to think about using them all, but I highly suggest that you pick a few and really just run with it and, take the time to train your staff, your colleagues, your students, and, to be able to build a universal design for learning support system within your classroom. So one option or idea is wearable AAC tools. You can see some ideas here, such as a wristband with some picture symbols, or a slap bracelet, or a little more gentle bracelet that you can print out. You can see on the right there, I have made some kind of like credit card sized mini communication boards to put on lanyards for my staff. And a note here is, go for it wherever you can wear it. That's wonderful. But always respect body autonomy, right? Always, always consider staff and student safety when selecting a wearable tool, and, just make sure that you respect your students' wishes and needs, because this can be something for you to wear, for you to communicate with your students. Your students can access it if you're wearing, or it can be something your students wear and they access it on their body to communicate with you. Then we have visual choice boards. I anticipate that many of us may be familiar with this type of tool. So whether you're using a software to create or printing screenshots of a device page, you can offer a binary choice or a large array of pictures as you're doing so. And you can make selections by pointing to pictures using a tool such as a little wand with a finger or a dinosaur or a butterfly on it. Or you can verbally state a choice, just having the visual reference there for communication. All right, and we're moving on to poster size communication boards. So I do apologize. We have a few announcements. I am currently, in an office right now, so I apologize for any background noise there. So we are moving on to poster size communication boards, and I found here really quickly the text here. There's some tips for creating large communication boards, and I found this final link here, the last one, examples of ways to use poster size boards. And that is these last two, the middle and the right pictures that you see here from, excuse me, Saltillo. So I like in the middle here how they started creating their board, and they're using a fly swatter, you can see there, to add more words day and day and be able to access them and point to them. And then for students, our students are a little smaller than maybe reaching those tall pictures over there. But, looking at that last picture, what a really fun idea to tape it to the floor. So obviously safety, needs to be considered, but you could you could roll cars and drive cars through your communication board. You can hop on letters. You could throw a beanbag. You could throw a ball to bounce on certain words as your students are communicating, but B, also just engaging in, the supports that you have in the classroom to build a language-rich environment. And just thinking about those large communication boards, if you happen to have smart boards or interactive boards in your classroom, it's a nice high-tech version of a light-tech tool. So you could just keep something up there, have a PDF posted for children to point to, or you can interactively have something going on the smart board regarding the AAC tool that you choose. And here's on the bottom here, just an example of some software you can download if you have a Windows PC or computer. So you can download TD Snap onto your computer or the Pretnom PRC software as well. All right, next we have playground communication boards. And this is a great tool to install on a community playground that you might have at your school or your center. Some examples here, if you wanted to look up some ideas. On the next page, a nice little screen grab here. Again, I just Googled, you can see Google image search for playground AAC board. There are so many options out there. So I thought Open AAC had some wonderful tips for implementing playground AAC. I'm not going to read through them, but if you access the slides, if you have access or you will access them after this, feel free to look through just some suggestions if that's something that you feel your school could benefit from as a universal design for learning support. Just noting here that make sure the board is low enough for all children to access the board. I think that's the one that really connects to us as working in preschools, right? We don't want our boards tacked up high on a 6-foot tall fence. It will be hard for our little ones to be able to communicate. We have printed picture icons next, just talking about, not necessarily a whole grid of icons, but we can print out individual icons and put them on a lid that says open, or on a phone that says hello, or on a picture that says drink during snack time or, meal time. So just some great ideas for pointing to communicate, exchanging to communicate, or using the pictures as visual reference, right? For those students in the class who are using spoken language to communicate. And a few examples here, we have transitioned to our mid-tech devices. All of these here typically use batteries to be able to function. So these are great, very durable, portable devices. You can program core vocabulary boards into some of these devices. You can program activity-specific vocabulary. You could take them between locations, keep them in one location. On the bottom right here, there is an AbleNet iTalk 4, and you can see it's used to have weather icons. So what a great option, even for your students who are, choosing or able to use spoken language, to have a visual reference of, is it windy, rainy, cloudy, or sunny, right? And using a button, a student can, if they can use an open hand, a closed hand, they can use another part of their body, they can just look at it and say it verbally to have that visual. So some great ways that this is not, this is a tool you might typically think of used for an individual, but a great way to use as a universal design for learning support across the whole classroom setting. And then likewise, thinking about recordable buttons, another AAC for all idea here that I just love. These are two screen grabs from their account. Right on the left here, we have play, and you're pressing play to comment, to make choices, share opinions. On the right, having the icon see or look next to a window, so we can gain attention, we could comment and talk about what's happening out there. So a great way to incorporate, not just for students that need it, in the sense that there are not currently using spoken language or they need additional individualized support such as these buttons, but for anyone around the classroom that wants to make a comment or is not able to access language at that time, or is just enjoying, it's a really fun way to interact and, be able to communicate with your students. And so I also wanted to bring up the idea of written communication tools, right? We've just been icon heavy for the past 10 minutes or so, and, rightfully so. Visual language is just such a wonderful, accessible tool for many, but we do have to incorporate and consider that some of our students, especially, and even our little ones, right, that are 3 and 4 and 5, they are, and earlier, if you have any any children that are younger than that, they may connect with language in a written way more than they may, connect to pictures. So thinking about reusable plastic pouches, something such as a boogie board, or there are boogie board adjacent types of products on Amazon, or if you were to, look up boogie board, you might find some reusable drawing boards or a dry erase board. So some great options there. And for the sake of today, just putting it out there as something that is available for your students, the idea of alternative pencils. So for your students who are really connecting with letters and words and numbers, but they're not able to yet hold a traditional writing tool, you might want to consider having alternative pencils. So any access to letters and of the alphabet and or numbers. So you might think about using magnets, stickers, puzzle pieces, wooden letters, all of those types of tools to help students have another option for communicating within the classroom setting. And you can also think about something called an alphabet flip chart, and this can be a student directly pointing to the letters, or it can be the student using a method such as eye gaze with a partner to assist them in scanning through and communicating what they'd like to say. And then, of course, that's for our students written-wise, some additional supports, but we might also have students who have visual impairments or needs that they might need a tactile communication tool. And even if you don't have students in your class that have documented vision needs or impairments, these are great tools to just have accessible for all. So might be a commercially made adapted book with textured graphics or tactile communication symbols. On the bottom left there is a kit where you can make tactile communication symbols. You could also use Wikisticks to add tactile feedback to your actual picture symbols to written communication tools or devices as well. And I know that was a lot. There were so many tools for you to think about. But now that you know the tools, you know why we're using them, how we can use them in the sense of, how we can create them and get them ready. The next step is really incorporating these tools into preschool classrooms. And, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If anything's coming up as we're talking, I will do my best to answer in the interim. And otherwise, we'll continue to move forward. So you've heard me use the term core vocabulary many times today, and core vocabulary really just represents about 80% of the words we use on a daily basis. And by combining these different core words, we can pretty much say anything we might need to communicate within a day. We have multiple meanings for our core words, so they're very versatile, and they help us to communicate for different functions. Just a quick resource and reference here for you all for the next slide that I'm going to show you. 100 frequently used core words, and this is from AAC Language Lab. And this is a little chart that I put together of the words that were listed. So you'll probably see a combination of many of these words if you are using those printed core vocabulary boards, that list of different websites I showed you earlier from different companies. Or if you are creating your own resources, feel free to think about some of these words up here as you're developing tools for your classroom. And I also just don't want to forget about fringe words, because they are the spicy words or the words that spice up or specify what you're communicating. They have unique meanings that often cannot be used abstractly. And because everyone has their own favorite topics to talk about, we do need to think about fringe words, right? And so when you think about when I talked about visual choice words, there were some very activity-specific words there that really were necessary to talk about potato head or snack time or whatever it might be that you want to talk about specifically. So we can use the word eat for snack time, but we might want to start building on language, eat cupcake or eat pizza or eat carrots. And thinking about those core words, there are two primary approaches that we would think about when we're trying to or working towards embedding core vocabulary in the classroom. We might go activity first, or we might use a target vocabulary approach. So no wrong answers. You can pick either way to embed core vocabulary within your classroom. So for activity first, you can see here, this is a blank version. I'm going to show you the filled out version. This is from Saltillo, so you can find this resource online. You might think of an activity or a topic, and then around you can see all of the different types of words that you could consider targeting in the classroom once you have all your tools. And this is same concept, just different graphic from Speak for Yourself. You can find this online as well. And then if you are going activity first, Communication Matrix has a great community blog post. And here's just an example of, circle time for our preschoolers or early childhood classrooms, where you might pick the activity, which is circle time, and think about different words or phrases that you might program or create within your AAC tools for all students to use. And just some more examples here, not from that blog, just some things that I've done and that I found helpful in making AAC activity first approach really fun. And there is a great post here with language in the summer sun where it says sensory or outdoor water play. Might be something to consider as we're moving into the summer months, if you are supporting your students in the classroom in the summer or sending ideas home for families. I'm going to pause for a second here if you want to screen grab or take a picture of these core vocabulary curriculum resources. So we just talked about picking an activity and picking words to match that activity. This resource here, this page of resources rather, is talking about choosing a word and then using it across the day, across the different activities. So this is core vocabulary curriculum. So some really wonderful things out there already made for you. And I'll just show you here. These are just some screen grabs of some of the resources within those websites I just previously showed you. And an example of, picking a word and using it across activities. I used the word go for a few weeks, and we did go down red for that ball toy and go sleep. You can see our little Paw Patrol guys there ready to go sleep in that camping bed. And then also I have a student that really liked to play Lego race cars. So we were split screening and saying, go faster. So, across whatever your students' interests are, this is, specifically in therapy sessions. But if you are thinking about these activities or these types of, activities in classrooms, you can embed a single word across activities if you're thinking about a core vocabulary approach. And just within either activity first or core vocabulary approach, some ideas for emergent literacy resources here. We could spend many, many hours going through emergent literacy, but, for today, just sharing it as a resource for you all. And then just thinking about, regardless of which approach you're using, while you're using universal AAC supports with your students, some ideas, as you can see, summarized from another Communication Matrix community post blog there. You might want to use a closed set. You might want to be priming, so if you're thinking about that circle time activity I mentioned before, oh, you know what, it's going to be your turn. You're going to say the weather soon. Get ready. You're going to pick sunny, cloudy, windy. So when you come up with your iTalk and, you have it ready, you've been priming that student to select a choice using the tool. The last one here is why I kind of brought this slide up, the descriptive teaching. So just a quick example here for what descriptive teaching looks like, right? Instead of making an icon for every character in Finding Nemo, for example, if you're talking about oceans, you might say, oh, what can you tell me about, Nemo the clownfish? You could use the word white, black, ooh, more colors, many colors, warm water, big water, live in plants. So, right, you can use the core vocabulary words you have and, really get into the nitty-gritty and describe them as opposed to using those more curriculum-specific words. And then before we dive into our last section, I know we're kind of winding down on time here. We will go a few minutes over. If you do have to leave within the next few minutes, I completely understand. This will be recorded. You can review the presentation at a later time if you want to catch our last section here. I know we did start a few minutes late, so I very much appreciate those hanging on for those who are able to. Just this quote here on the left, talking about AAC goal being autonomous communication, right? So really our goal for all of our students is to say what you want to whoever you want, whenever you want, and however you want to say it. So thinking about that as we're sprinkling tools across our classroom and providing universal support for those who may be situationally not able to communicate via spoken words, or those who prefer a certain type of tool or device, regardless of, the reason of picking or selecting a certain tool. We want to just provide, as you can see here, this nice little toolbox for whatever that child needs in the moment to be an effective communicator and be an autonomous communicator as well. And you can see here the AAC coach, just another, again, someone I'm not affiliated with or, necessarily sharing their opinions or views, but love the content here. Just so that they do a wonderful job and really align with, just thinking about providing universal supports for our learners and providing just different options in the classroom for students. All right, so we are going to dip down into thinking about some barriers for a second here, just because we really can't move forward and make change until we can identify what is preventing us from making that change, right? And I'm in a new setting, over the past few years, I've started at this new organization. And, before you dive in and make changes and shift thoughts, you really need to think about what the barriers are. So you can effectively, run with the things that are working well and the things that are really successful for that team, that classroom, whatever the school or organization, wide situation is that you're in, but that you can address barriers effectively. So when we think about barriers, specifically opportunity barriers, these are constraints that impede access to a resource. So whether you're thinking about one specific tool for a student or something you're using across the classroom. And we have knowledge and skill barriers, attitudinal barriers, time constraint barriers, of which we are experiencing currently. So I'm sure you all are feeling that on the daily, right, as we're trying to get all the things done. Systemic barriers, and that includes things like financial and staffing barriers. And so we're going to start at the top, go through those barriers, and talk about how we can support our team members with overcoming some of them and addressing them. Often, we think about educating as the first opportunity barrier that we often just have to do a check-in, right, before we're implementing. We want to make sure that staff understand the value and importance of an effective communication system. So through education and skill building, we're going to build some confidence with AAC. And a quick training on training, just going to show you some resources. Again, we could talk all day about, what training might look like for someone who's not immersed in the field of AAC, or someone that isn't doing this on the day in and day out. So what I like to think about is framing AAC training around disability rights and neurodiversity, and it can be a really positive way to set the stage for future conversations with your staff and any mindset shifts regarding supporting preschoolers with communication needs and abilities and differences. So I start with the Bill of Rights often. Day one, when we're getting into AAC training, I'm diving right in and talking about what communication rights are, where they come from. For those of you who are not familiar, the link is right here on this first bullet. And then at the very bottom of this slide, there's a resource from the Northwest Augmentative Communication Society. If you haven't visited their website, they are just continually sharing so many amazing resources and topics about AAC and advocacy for communication rights. And so really, this is the Bill of Rights that was developed. You can find it again on that previous slide. And you can also find it from these different creators and artists here. So I encourage you, rather than screenshotting or taking a capture of what's here, please feel free to support these creators and using free download options. You can see there's some reference links below for all of them, but just some nice visuals to post. And if you're a therapist in your therapy space, in your classroom, to really just, remind people of how important it is that we provide access to multiple different types of supports for our students who have individual supports and for everyone in the classroom to have different ways to communicate at all times. And that being said, I talk about communication rights, and then I talk about what it looks like when we model the tools that we're going to select. So, at this point, you're going to maybe have, for example, I have a little communication board here. I might be talking about this board. I might be talking about a button, whatever it is that you're going to be implementing. I talk about aided language input and what that looks like, and I model what it looks like to model. So a great example here from Saltillo, you can see the link down below if you'd like to gather this image as well as the information associated with it in relation to aided language input. And I have my staff model. We talk about how we encourage students to communicate with these tools without requiring or forcing them. We talk about having meaningful things to communicate about. We provide wait time for our students. We speak slowly and use correct grammar. We model words on the tool by describing what we're doing, what the student doing, what is happening around us. And we are always attributing meaning to students' actions and communication attempts. And again, more on that, that could, again, be another hour of us talking about aided language input. But, just thinking about if you're training staff, this is a key component of what you're going to talk about when you're suggesting or implementing AAC tools as universal design for learning supports. And so even when you provide the education, sometimes knowledge is not enough. So we still might have some attitudinal barriers or be stuck with time or have just some overarching systemic barriers that we are working towards addressing. And so often, I think about I'm here with all of you because I have spent many years learning, listening about AAC and understanding more about what's going to be useful, supportive for students, what's really not going to be useful, supportive, maybe even harmful for students. And so even if someone has taken a course, maybe if they took something when they started grad school or, they had something in high school where they learned out, in the past decade or so, even the past couple of years, a lot of the previously assumed notions about who, when, how, and why AAC can be used are universally known to be false, right? So we have a lot of these myths out there, and the really great thing is I'm going to show you a few super fun resources regarding shifting attitudes about AAC and providing factual information. So AAC Coach, I mentioned their work previously, but lots of fun infographics there if you would like to share them with your staff or just have them for your own personal, learning journey. We can think about shifting from why a student is struggling to a more strengths-based approach on the right-hand side. And some great ways to do that, to offer resources to your staff or for your own personal, knowledge and journey is the U.S. Department of Education finally created this wonderful assistive technology myths document. And it's a really great Mythbuster document. Not as fun, colorful, as exciting as some of the other tools I'm going to show you in a few seconds, but it's there. It's got some chock full of resources and references. So I suggest that link below. Just check it out and, bring it to your IEP meeting, share it with your staff. It's a great tool to have on your side when you're advocating for your students, either individually needing AAC or if you're trying to, work on a system-wide support, AAC support. So when we think about addressing AAC misinformation that's out there, Toby Dynavox has a nice short little video here, and these are some screen grabs from that video. You can see there's some myths up there that children might be too young, that it will prevent children from developing speech, and that individuals can potentially be too impaired to benefit from AAC, and it debunks all of those myths that we know are not true. And it's just a really great short video with some resources. Hard to see the references on the bottom of those screen grabs, but I promise they're there. And if you view the video, it's a great resource to have those references. And then from Forbes AAC, this guy, the Myth Man, He's a fun little character that's addressing some common AAC myths by summarizing what the myth is and the best practices. And they also provide some resources for further reading. So on the bottom right of the screen, you can see where the images were captured from, and you can find Mythman and help to share the word of how you're going to bust some of those myths. So another tool that's a little less dry than the U.S. Department of Education document, but just as factual and a great reference. And then this is just a comparison document that I created. Feel free to share, with my reference on top there. Just thinking about, what AAC is, what it isn't, and just helping to really showcase, what we expect, hope, and know about AAC. And, the red kind of just being that what we know it's not and what we're moving away towards, hopefully, as a school, an organization, a community. And you can see at the bottom there, all of the descriptions of links with the links are available for you. And time constraints, because here we are just, in the constraint of time, thinking about time constraints often prevent us from practicing and educating at our optimal levels, right? Never enough time. But thinking about ways that you can, overcome this barrier or address this barrier is that maybe you could agree upon 1 or 2 core vocabulary boards or tools per classroom, right? Rather than completely individualizing for each classroom. If we all have the same tool, it will, cut down on the time that you need to make materials and learn the locations of symbols across different boards. So it's a great way to quickly address that. Highlighting the use of the benefit of using pre-made boards. So really fun to create custom boards for everyone. We want to adhere to everyone's interests and preferences, but in the interest of thinking from a classroom universal design perspective, right? We might want to use things that are pre-made if they're appropriate, for the situation and our preschool population. But we do need a starting point, right? So just jumping in with something that's ready to go. And then I like to think about creating a shared questions document, when I'm working with staff. So whether that's a Google Doc, a dry erase board, so that, quick questions, concerns can be easily put in one place for decreasing the amount of time that you're going to have to meet for consults. And, it's going to take a week for me to find, the SLP to come back in and answer my question, so if it's right there, you can pop into the classroom and see what they need, or, you can check your shared Google Doc twice a week and, be more efficient with getting supports out there and helping your students. And then one of the easiest ways to identify any barriers that you might have with your staff, whether you are the therapist supporting, whether you are, another member of the educational team, is just ask what's needed, right? Is someone unsure of how to access printable documents? Can they not get to the laminator? Do they not know how to, model correctly or, in a way that's supporting the student? Do they need different tape? Whatever it might be, we're not going to and I see we specifically when I'm thinking about, being a therapist, we're not going to necessarily pile more work onto our load, but if we can drop off, some tape or, just send them a document, whatever it might be, we just have to work together to direct people into finding the right person to help or to, getting resources as efficiently as possible into our students' hands. And leaving you with the most potentially challenging, barrier to address, specifically on a short-term type of level. Systemic barriers are going to take time to be able to address, but here's just some ideas that you can think about chipping away at over time to make your classroom or your school or your organization more accessible to students in relation to communication supports in the classroom. So you might want to evaluate your school's current assistive technology areas of growth and needs. You might want to just join your state organization or regional organization to connect with others that are doing something similar. Attending, you're all here today, so yay, attending AAC events that are out there. Know your local AAC consultants. A lot of consultants will give you the free things. They will come out, they will provide education. So check, any company that you are thinking about using, or if you have, a few devices or using the boards for a specific, app or program, reach out because you're going to get a lot of support there. And that's just going to be one more person, that's going to be on your side helping to get these supports out to your classrooms. Think about your RESNA directory, finding people in your area that can help out. You can join listservs. So Toby Dynavox, Center for AAC and Autism. I could have gone on and listed a whole slide of other listservs that are out there, whether it's the AAC coach, whatever it might be. But just getting onto listservs and finding opportunities that are out there, whether they're webinars, whether they're volunteer opportunities or free resources that come your way. You don't want to be inundated, but I find that I get some really great things in my inbox just by connecting on those listservs. And then, AAC Awareness Month, National Speech Language Hearing Month, take those months to educate those in your community. And I think that's a great way to dedicate the time specifically to awareness and education and highlighting how wonderful, all these AAC tools can be. And then just keeping it going all year long in hopes, right? And so just one last trinket of advice. And for those of you who are here, still here with me live, I really, really appreciate you. But just thinking about all of the resources, ideas, frameworks, references, suggestions, everything we've talked about today, obviously it can create the ideal learning environment for students we support. But we know life is not ideal. So I just, encourage you to start small, pick one of the suggestions or resources. Maybe there's one website or, one purchase you're going to make or one material you're going to create, and celebrate forward movement as you break down barriers, because you've got this. And please don't forget to have fun, because if we're not having fun, our little ones aren't having fun, and that's no fun. So don't ever forget, just to enjoy yourself and the communication environments that you set up with your classroom. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I hope that you find something that will stick and you run with it. And feel free to share any successes at my email address here or contact me with any questions that might come up. And for those of you who are joining us not live, please also contact as well. I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Melissa. That was amazing. Just a few comments from the feed that I'll just post here so it's live.
Sure.
A couple of people said that they've used Etsy to get like different AAC symbols printed on rugs and pillows and other tactile icons as well. So just in case some of you didn't see those comments, there were some recommendations of Etsy stores to kind of go along with what you were talking about. But I appreciate all that you had to share with us. That was wonderful. And the slides, like I mentioned, are shared by Melissa on the schedule. When you click on that YouTube link, you'll be able to pick up the slides and get access to those awesome resources that she shared with us today.
Thank you.